Welcome back to another edition of the Here We Go podcast. I am your host, Trent Ging, and I'm going to be talking about something that I really think that is kind of early off-season stuff, right? And I was actually watching the inauguration. I'm not going to make this very political. I don't care about your belief system or who you voted for or anything like that. The point to this was simply that as I'm watching the inauguration, as I do every 4 years, it's just interesting to me the history and I like hearing like the old music and stuff, like the old songs that they continue to do over the years, and just the traditions of everything that makes us a country. And so I thought of like maybe just doing like kind of a State of the Union of where the Pittsburgh Steelers are right now, as we hear State of the Union addresses every year in politics. So I thought let's just do that right now and kind of dig into some of these things and kind of talk about exactly where we are as a team and an organization right now. Very critical of exactly everything that was going on with, Coach Tomlin not getting fired, with a guy like Terrell Austin. Obviously, he so far hasn't gone anywhere. Pat Meyer hasn't gone anywhere. Arthur Smith is taking interviews for jobs, but I don't know if anything's going to come of that. I would guess not. If I were to take a guess, I would imagine he's going to be back as the OC next year. And so I think assuming that he is back, that's very important. And the reason it's important is because where do we go as an offense? Because defensively, we definitely had letdowns as the year had gone on. Offensively, I felt like we had a ton of letdowns all season. We really weren't a top-tier offense. We got as high as, I think, 10th at one point in offensive production. But I thought it was more smoke and mirrors than it was actual, this is who we are kind of production. And so I wanted to start by talking about, was this an Arthur Smith issue? Was the system an issue? And I know a lot of people are really, really hard on Arthur Smith, and maybe I'm kind of in the minority on this. I don't know. But I actually don't really think a lot of this was Arthur Smith's problems. So as we heard late in the season, he and Russell Wilson were not getting along. And so when I hear something like that, I start to question why. And I think a large part of that, Russell Wilson really wasn't running the system that Arthur Smith was calling. I mean, if we looked at what he did down the stretch, it was a lot of moonball, deep shots, and checkdowns. And there wasn't a whole lot in between, to be perfectly honest with you. I felt like Arthur Smith had called some nice games. I think there was fair criticism to go around for some games that he didn't really call very good games. And I feel like adjustments continue to be an issue for this team. But I'll be honest with you, I put a lot more on Mike Tomlin than I do on Arthur Smith. And sometimes maybe even Terrell Austin. That's why I also don't think that, a lot of people are out there like, we want to get the bright young offensive coordinator that would come in here and they're going to have great ideas and they're going to be very creative and we're going to bring this team back and this and that. Why would you want to come here as a young OC, knowing that Mike Tomlin runs basically everything? In Dulac's reporting, he actually mentioned, pretty much that Justin Fields did not have a full playbook, the same way that Russell Wilson did. And it was obvious. I mean, if you were watching games, I talked about it quite a bit. I did not feel like they ever actually opened the playbook up for Justin Fields. And so now you're going into 2025 and you need a quarterback and you don't know what you have because you didn't open the playbook up. Justin Fields could have flourished or he could have fell flat on his face. We don't know because we didn't give him that opportunity. And it's kind of a reoccurring theme for Coach Tomlin, in my opinion, because he slow walks these guys through and almost tries to protect them from themselves in certain situations. Like, they don't even need the protection. Think about Joey Porter Jr. last year. He comes in and he's held back and he's playing situationally. And then when he starts, he's clearly better than the guys that were playing ahead of him. And then you start thinking to yourself, like, why do we do this? Like, why are we slow rolling this thing out instead of just plug and play? And then you have a guy like Dan Moore Jr., who they do plug and play, and he's the guy who should not be plug and play. Like, it's so just interesting to me, the difference in a philosophy between one guy and another and the way that this is handled. And of course, Tomlin has talked very openly about the fact that he doesn't treat everybody equally. And that's evident, right? I mean, he treats a guy like George Pickens much differently than he treats Calvin Austin. But at the same time, sometimes he's treating certain guys better and differently than others, and they don't deserve it, like Dan Moore. I mean, Dan Moore was a starting tackle on this team for 4 straight years. And so I just question, why would a young OC or a young DC want to come to Pittsburgh at all if they know Tomlin's just going to override anything that they want to do and override anything that they are capable of accomplishing? And it's all in the means of safe risk management style of football. And as I was watching the games yesterday, and I'm watching the Bills taking chances, and I'm watching the Ravens taking chances, looking at the Rams and Eagles even, and these are inclement weather games. And of course, these teams ran the ball a good bit in inclement weather, and that's fine. That's what you would expect to happen. But, like, I'm seeing Josh Allen throw the ball downfield, and I was sitting here thinking, like, if this was a game that Pittsburgh was in, there's no way Russell Wilson or Justin Fields was going to throw that ball more than 10 yards. Like, it would not happen. That's not the offense. We'd be running screen plays. We'd be handing the ball off 40 times between Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris, and we would not even attempt to throw the ball hardly at all. And I just don't know how much better 2025 can be, regardless of who the quarterback is, whether you're in the Russell Wilson camp or whether you're in the Justin Fields camp, because I just don't think Tomlin's going to take his finger off of the imprint of this team. And I think that's the biggest issue. And that's also why I advocated that I feel like Tomlin is the guy who needs to be changed, maybe more so than anybody else in the organization. And I do believe Mike Tomlin's a good coach. I'm not in the camp that's like, fire him, he's the worst coach, he's overrated, this and that. I actually think he's a really good coach. But I also feel like that things have run their course, and he has too much control over the Pittsburgh Steelers organizationally, not even just as the head coach. I mean, the dude's not a GM, but he basically acts like judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. And that's the part that I think is very difficult when it comes to hiring these other coaches. Because once, if an OC or a DC leaves Pittsburgh, I mean, they're really generally out of football, like altogether. Like, these guys aren't like high, sought after candidates. They're guys who pretty much are done. And so I just don't know where you think this could improve as long as he's still got his finger on the pulse of absolutely everything. And I was also looking through some of the team needs going into next year, and kind of based on some of the reporting that was in that article from Dulac, I broke it down like this. So the needs that I have in order is quarterback. Likely Justin Fields is going to be the quarterback in 2025. I do not believe it's going to be Russell Wilson. I continue to say that. And I actually think a deal for Justin Fields is going to be done sooner rather than later. I'm not convinced they're going to draft a guy. If they are, it's going to be later in the draft, not earlier in the draft. Maybe a mid-round pick would be in there. It depends on how the draft falls. But I think the second step is cornerback. And I'm talking about the outside corner, not the slot corner. I think it's got to be the cornerback 2 that's going to be playing across from Joey Porter Jr. Corey Trice, it looks like the team's going to intend on getting him as the second corner in this look. But of course, with his health, I just don't know that you can count on him being available game in and game out. So if it were me, I would actually go after a second corner. I would do it earlier rather than later. And I was kind of surprised when I started making this list, how much of this list becomes defensive. And I do think we need to get much younger on the defensive side of the football. We've put so much emphasis in the drafts on the offensive side, and we have a very young offense. And that's part of what is at our advantage is because they can grow together. Offensive line specifically is very young and can grow together. But I actually would go after a second cornerback in this draft. I think that's going to be the smartest play. I think there's going to be some great names available. I don't know if it will be the first round pick. I just think that is the first need beside quarterback, if that makes sense. Third, wide receiver. That's evident. I mean, we saw what happened when George Pickens went down. Nobody could get open. Nobody could run routes that were going to be effective. And you can't rely on a 5'7" Calvin Austin as your wide receiver 2 in those situations. Calvin, I think, has a role in this offense, and I actually, really like what Calvin did this year. But I also think you're kind of getting the best out of Calvin right now. He's not a long-term starter. So I would go after another wide receiver. I would go after a big-time guy. That's kind of maybe where I would be looking at the first round is possibly in that wide receiver being available in that spot. The next, I actually think slot corner, I think, is still an issue. The team obviously shows no trust in Beanie Bishop. I thought Beanie Bishop was playing much better. I personally like Beanie Bishop, but I think if you're going to rank this thing based on the needs and how the team evaluates needs, I still think slot corner is going to be very high on that list. Fifth, I actually think nose tackle. So I know Keanu Benton has been the nose tackle in this defense for the last couple of seasons, rotating in and out, and more of the starter this year than he was last year. He's more of the rotational piece last year. I really think he needs to be the guy who takes over for Larry Ogunjobi. I just don't think he has the strength to put up, I guess, develop into a very good run defender. I don't think he has the strength to develop as a good run defender. I think we need to get a guy who's not 300 pounds, who is much larger than that. Think of a guy like Travis Jones or Michael Pierce in Baltimore. I think that's the body style we need to go after, these 330, 340-pound guys who are going to be basically immovable objects in the middle there. So, guys like Tyleik Williams. I think he would be prototypically size-wise for what I'd be looking for in that position. But he actually also has some movement in him. So I could see us looking at that position in the first round as well. I would move Benton over into the 3 technique and play more of the Larry Ogunjobi role. I also think it would open up his pass rush in that scenario as well. So I actually think that if you can move him over and you have more of the run stuff guy, I think it's going to open up his pass rush on every downs, not just third down situationally, because we still saw him coming off the field a good bit in those pass rush situations. It would be, Lario and Cam Hayward more than it was Keanu Benton. But I actually think Benton would be better served, not just in the third down situations, but I actually think he'd be better served as a 3 tech to open up his pass rush on early downs as well. So I really think that move needs to happen. I don't know if it will. They really like him, but I honestly think that we need a guy who's kind of going to be a really stout defender in the run game. And if nothing else could be more evident, then look at what happened in the Eagles game. Look at what happened in the Ravens game. Look what happened in the second Ravens game. You've got to have a guy who's stout in that middle. We could fill that through free agency as well. Javon Hargrave, I think, is going to be a free agent. There's a couple other guys on that list that I think would be interesting to pick up. I'll do more deep dives into positions as we go. And then I actually think running back is sixth. So I think running back would be the next step. I keep hearing that this team, people would not be surprised if we draft a running back in the first 3 rounds. I think that'd be a massive mistake. Mel Kiper Jr. mentioned there was 35 draftable running backs in this class. 35, which is incredible. And so why waste a high pick on a guy because he's super talented when there are other talented backs that will be available much later in the draft? And you're bringing back Jaylen Warren. Now, whether you want to argue, is he an every down back? I do not think he's an every down back. I think his build does not lend him to be an every down back. I think he definitely needs a second guy. He needs to split carries, much like he and Najee Harris did. And I have a guy that I'm really high on right now, and I'm not digging into any film, but I really like Khalil Mullings out of the University of Michigan. I think that guy is going to be available super late in these drafts. He's got some breakaway speed. He's broke big, long runs in college. He's faster. He's about the same size as what Najee Harris is right now. Converted linebacker to running back. I think the guy's got something that I would target him later in the draft. That's just me. Again, I'll start diving into some of these positions a little bit deeper than that. But that would be what I would be looking at, is a guy later in the draft who can bring value, who can be a good player, but maybe not necessarily like the Quinshon Judkins, the Ollie Gordons, Gordon had a down season, Travion Hendersons. Some of these guys that are higher up in the list, we're not going to get Ashton Genty. So anybody who still thinks that that's going to happen, that dude's going to be gone way before pick 21. It's just, he's not going to be there. So I'm not going to bring him up. But I think running back needs to be 6, and then possibly even wide receiver again, if Pickens gets traded. Dulac basically laid out in that article that Pickens probably is not getting a second contract in Pittsburgh. So either he's going to be playing out his last contract. We would have an option to franchise tag him. After that, you're not going to franchise a guy like that twice. You could get 2 more years out of him. The question would then become, if we're not paying him, how does he respond to that? And that would be something that becomes very interesting, because I don't know. I don't think anybody's going to know how he responds, because George is just so unpredictable in general. And then some other not immediate need stuff, but things that I think would be very important. At 8, I have guard. At 9, I have tight end. And I'll be honest with you, if a guy like Tyler Warren falls, I may even consider drafting him in the first round. Sounds crazy, because I know we paid Pat Freiermuth, but I think this draft just needs to be where we need to go in stacking talent at all positions. I don't care where it's at. I don't care if it's an immediate need. I don't care if it's not an immediate need. I would stack talent in this draft. I do think we need a safety. We need the DeMonte KZ replacement. Inside linebacker is going to be a need. I am hoping they bring back Elandon Roberts. I think both sides will be motivated to get that done, so that may not be a draft need. And then they need a backup tackle. They need a swing tackle. Calvin Anderson is not going to be on contract. Dan Moore Jr. is going to walk in free agency. You're going to have Falatoni and Broderick Jones starting at tackles. But I still think you need another tackle in the mix there. So there's a lot of needs this team's going to be faced with. How much of it gets filled through free agency? We have a nice surplus of capital right now to work with. Nothing top of the league, but I think we're right around the 10 to 12 range in draft capital, cap space capital. And we still have basically all of our picks and a couple extras in the 7th round. So there's a lot we can do and a lot of different ways we can attack this to fill our roster. But I really feel like right now it's going to be all about stacking talent, because I think 2026 is when they're actually going to look to draft a quarterback. So I would continue to stack talent. I would never put ourselves in a situation like we did this year where we didn't have a viable wide receiver 2, where, Calvin Austin is your wide receiver 3, even though I really thought had a nice season. And where Pat Freiermuth is the only tight end who can do any damage. I mean, we're going to run these heavy tight end sets. Washington got involved in the pass game more this year than I actually anticipated him to, but at the same time, he's more of your blocking tight end. He's not going to be your pass catching tight end. So I would get another guy who can add to that. If it's a guy in the first round like Tyler Warren, I would go for it. If it's a guy who maybe is a few rounds later, like a Luke Lachey out of Iowa, I think it's pretty safe to say that Iowa tight ends tend to do really well in the NFL, even if they're not drafted very highly. So there's a lot of options in this draft to go after in that position, in that skill set. So I would continue to stack talent. I just think that's where the state of this Pittsburgh Steelers team is going to be in 2025. It's not going to be about, who's the quarterback. It's not going to be about, can we win a Super Bowl? It's going to be more along the lines of, like, we really actually have to build this roster out in a much better way than we've done in the past. So Khan's done a great job of finding talent in the draft. Let's hope he does it again. And that's about all I had for today. So looking to go live tomorrow. Hope you all enjoy the content as always. Be digging more into the off-season stuff as we continue to progress through this. So as always, like, share, subscribe, and leave comments. Appreciate it. Have a great day.